LoveLore Library. Chapter 811. Ning Xuema had actually heard of her before, but because she didn't take it to heart and didn't specifically inquire about her, there wasn't much information about her. She only heard that after she was conferred the title of princess by the Empress, she was often bullied by the real princess. The Empress was very righteous and often punished her own daughter to vent her anger for her adopted daughter. In the end, she even expelled the real princess's biological daughter from the palace. It was said that after the real princess was expelled from the palace, she couldn't think straight and jumped into the river to commit suicide. At that time, she just casually listened and didn't pay attention to it. But now that she saw Feng Jiaxin's face, she suddenly felt a little sad for the real princess. Needless to say, after Feng Jiaxin entered the palace, she often used the weak to bully the strong to harm the real princess. In the end, she simply forced the real princess out of the palace and got rid of the thorn in her side. This Feng Jiaxin was indeed a genius, but with this kind of character, Ning Xuema smiled and looked at her meaningfully. "Don't worry, I won't be in the same sect as you. I'll be ashamed to be in the same sect as you." She turned and looked at the iron chain and smiled. "Since we're already here, I'll pass this first." Xuema made a gesture to Kirin. Kirin understood and immediately opened its mouth to spit out a stream of water. That stream of water directly froze into ice when it hit the iron chain, forming an ice chain. Everyone was a little confused. When they went up, they were afraid that the chain would be too slippery, so they specially wore shoes with concave and convex patterns. But Ning Xuema directly asked her pet to turn the iron chain into an ice chain. Could they still walk? Before they finished thinking, they saw Ning Xuema had already started to spin on the spot. After 100 rounds, she jumped up and landed on the ice chain. She then spread out her arms and her whole body was like a butterfly fluttering in the wind, sliding to the opposite side at lightning speed. Everyone's mouth formed an "oh." Just now, when the intern disciples were crossing this chain, most of them walked over cautiously. A few of them who had high skills ran over. And Ning Xuema was the first one to directly slide over like this. Her red clothes were fluttering in the wind. Red clothes, black hair, and graceful sliding posture made her look like a flaming butterfly dancing on the iron chain, full of a kind of tension beauty. To make these people speechless, Ning Xuema had to use her absolute advantage to shock them. So at this time, she also used all her skills. When she glided, she used a kind of figure skating footwork. Her posture was so beautiful that it made everyone's eyes to pop. She even did a backflip midway, eliciting screams from the girls who were already nervous. But before they could stop screaming, she landed lightly on the swaying ice chains and continued to run as fast as lightning. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Feng Jiaxin's eyes. She quietly moved to the side of the iron chain and twisted her finger in her sleeve. A watermelon-sized watermelon S's, a watermelon teat. Seeing that Ning Xuema's feet were about to hit that stone, she suddenly did a front flip and flew up again. When she flipped and landed, she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but she kicked that stone. Whoosh! That stone was like a whistling meteor, shooting straight toward Feng Jiaxin. Feng Jiaxin was originally satisfied and waiting to see Ning Xuema make a fool of herself. She never thought that she would do this. Seeing that the stone was moving so fast, it was difficult for her to dodge it in a graceful manner. Chapter 812. In a hurry, Feng Jiaxin's body suddenly leaned back, and with an iron plank bridge, she dodged the whistling stone. But she didn't guard against a sharp stone at the place where she leaned back. Puff! The back of her head was in close contact with the sharp stone. She hit it hard and didn't practice the iron head technique. Therefore, she was in pain. Helian Shao saw that she was playing tricks again and was furious. He was about to punish her, but he didn't expect that she had already received her retribution. He couldn't help but laugh, harming others and harming yourself. Retribution. Feng Jusin saw stars in front of her eyes. After flying for a long time, she came back to her senses and jumped up from the ground. There was a big bruise on the back of her head, almost bursting out of her hair. Her hair was messy and her clothes were scattered. She was in a sorry state. She was ashamed and angry. She couldn't help but look at Feng Lianyi, brother Feng, Ning. Miss Ning definitely did it on purpose. She plotted against me. Feng Lianyi glanced at her coldly, as if he just recognized her today. His voice was slightly cold. You plotted against her first. Did she think he was blind and didn't see her little movements? Feng Jusin murmured, Senior brother Feng, you said that when teammates pass, we can use extreme methods. We can work together and plot against each other, so you were plotted against by her. What's there to complain about? Feng Lianyi's voice was even colder. Feng Jusin. She was speechless. While they were talking, Ning Xuemo had already glided to the other side. She succeeded. And she succeeded very beautifully. Helian Xiao couldn't help but take the lead to applaud Ning Xuemo. He laughed, Miss Ning, even if I lose to you in the future, I'll be convinced. His voice spread far and wide. After saying that, he looked at Feng Jusin with disdain. Feng Jusin pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. The final outcome hadn't been decided yet. She would work harder. She could do it. A beautiful genius like her could definitely become the ancestor's disciple and become his second direct female disciple. She wanted to turn the tables. She wanted to let these rich kids see that she, a commoner, could also step on them one day. If she could successfully become the ancestor's disciple, she definitely couldn't forgive these two people who made her a fool of herself. Feng Lianyi could not be let off either. He actually wasn't biased towards a genius like her. She had been pretending to meet and chat with him by chance for the past few days, but it was all in vain. While she was secretly venting her anger, Feng Tianyi had already slid to the other end of the iron chain and led Ning Xuemo to the other 6 levels. Young people liked to watch the fun. Naturally, they didn't want to miss such a big show like Ning Xuemo breaking through the checkpoint alone, so they all followed her. After these disciples left, 2 disciples appeared at the edge of the pool. They pointed their fingers at the pool, and in the blink of an eye, the fierce flood dragon in the pool turned into a big bubble. Inside the bubble were the few intern disciples who had fallen down. When these intern disciples were released, they were still dizzy and disoriented. They didn't know if they were alive or dead. A disciple came forward and patted them on the shoulder, telling them that they had failed the selection and could leave the mountain immediately. After everyone left, a man in white appeared on the platform where Ning Xuemo and the others had been standing. Elegant and elegant, he was the Sun Moon sect's chief steward, Yelu Jinghen. He looked at the direction where Ning Xuemo and the others had disappeared and concentrated for a moment. He took out a golden sound-transmitting talisman. Chapter 8:13. Yelu Jing and wanted to pick it up but was hesitant. He paused for a moment and sighed. In the end, he didn't pick it up and put it back into his pocket. Although Miss Ning was injured now, her life wasn't in danger. It wasn't a critical moment, so he didn't want to disturb the ancestors' cultivation. However, could Miss Ning really pass the 6 tests in 12 hours? She had promised in front of everyone. If she couldn't pass, the ancestor wouldn't be able to accept her even if he wanted to go back on his words. That person was planning this, wasn't he? He didn't expect that person to go against the ancestor's orders and set such a big trap for Miss Ning. Perhaps he should start from the 6 tests and go easy on Ning Xuemo. As he was thinking of a countermeasure, the voice transmission talisman on his waist suddenly lit up. He frowned slightly. It was from that person. He picked it up and heard a cold voice, "Come to the secret room to see me quickly. Otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences." Yellow Jing in a clean room that looked like it was made of ice and snow. The ancestor sat on a cold couch and looked at Yellow Jing and with sharp eyes. "You want to help her?" Yellow Jing took a deep breath and didn't hide it. "Yes, the ancestor personally ordered me to take care of her. I was just following the ancestor's orders." The ancestor lowered his eyes slightly. "So he didn't really believe me," Yellow Jing looked at him with cold eyes. "In fact, you really can't be trusted. The ancestor asked you to bring her out of the mystifying illusionary realm safely, but you let her suffer such serious injuries. Since she wants to be the ancestor's disciple, she will have to go there alone sooner or later." "I just brought it forward," said the ancestor. "But she is only at the Earth tier level 2. The beast you released in the mystifying illusionary realm was the Yazi beast. This beast can only pass if it cultivated to the Earth tier level 5. Yellow Jing had secretly observed Ning Shuama's injuries. It was the Yazi beast that injured her. Thinking of this, he still had lingering fears. If she was really torn apart by the Yazi beast, how are you going to explain it to the ancestor? "I know what to do." The ancestor's voice was cold. Since the ancestor gave her special treatment, she should have special abilities. There was nothing wrong with what I did. I'm also testing her aptitude. "Then what are the results of your investigation?" Yellow Jing asked. "Barely." The overlord answered with 4 words. Yellow Jing couldn't help but sneer. "You let an Earth stage level 2 girl fight a level 5 beast, and you say she barely passed. This girl is obviously one of a kind." The venerable sovereign didn't say anything. Yellow Jing took a deep breath. "Since you think she has passed, why did you give her such a difficult task, making her pass the 6 trials in 12 hours? You clearly know that this is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. You just don't want her to become the ancestor's disciple, right? Everything else was just an excuse. Why? Why are you doing this? If she doesn't pass the exam and takes someone else as her master, the ancestor will definitely settle accounts with you when he returns." The ancestor lowered his eyes slightly and said in a soft voice, "I know, but I have to do this." "Why?" "Because she is a heavenly calamity lone star." The ancestor took a light breath, and his voice was even colder. Since the ancestor became friends with her, there has been a lot of problems. Her fate as a heavenly calamity lone star cannot be changed easily. The ancestor has already been implicated by her. Chapter 8:14. If Ning Shuama becomes the ancestor's disciple, who knows how much trouble she'll cause. I can't let her harm the entire Sun-Moon sect. Yellow Jing. I think the ancestor knows what he's doing. How can you meddle in his affairs? The ancestor's eyes were cold and sharp. She might be the ancestor's origin tribulation. Even if I have to die, I can't let anything happen to the ancestor. Yellow Jing. She couldn't get through to him. Yellow Jing didn't want to be entangled with him anymore, so she turned and left. The ancestor's figure flashed, and he suddenly appeared in front of Yellow Jing. He reached out and grabbed a golden sound-transmitting talisman from Yellow Jing-an's body. Then he retreated like flowing water and sat down on the white jade praying mat. His movements were too slow to be described as lightning. In the blink of an eye, he had completed this series of actions and sat down as if he hadn't moved at all. Yellow Jing-an's expression changed, and she abruptly turned back. Why did you steal my sound-transmitting talisman? Give it back. He had stolen the sound-transmitting talisman that Yellow Jing-an used to communicate with the ancestor. The ancestor raised his hand, and an ice wall appeared in front of him, blocking Yellow Jing An's movements. His voice was incomparably cold. "I'll return it to you in 12 hours. He looked at Yellow Jing An with cold eyes. "Don't try to help her. I'm just letting her know the difficulty and retreat. I don't want to take her life. If you blindly help her, I don't know what I'll do to prevent future trouble." Yellow Jing An stiffened. "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm just telling you. I mean what I say. If you don't want her to die, then don't do anything." Yellow Jing An was furious. "The ancestor won't forgive you when he comes back. I've said it before. For the ancestor's safety, I've already risked my life." The ancestor's reply was indifferent. "Yellow Jing An, what you're doing is unfair to that girl. She's qualified to have the ancestor as her master. My mission is to protect. I don't care about anything else." The ancestor closed his eyes. "You can scram." If they really fought, Yellow Jing An wasn't a match for the ancestor, so he could only choose to leave. After pausing outside for a moment, he headed towards the place where Ning Xuemo was challenging the trial. Even if he couldn't help her pass the trial, he could still protect her a little. No matter what, he would never allow Ning Xuemo's life to be in danger. He knew that the first obstacle Ning Xuemo had to pass was the Bronze Men Alley. There were all kinds of bronze men whose skills were around Earth rank level 1. These bronze men were more flexible than real people. When they attacked people, they would automatically arrange themselves into a formation. Normally, when passing through this array, they would form a group of 3. This way, the 3 of them could help each other and defend against the attacks of the bronze men from different directions. This was the place where the elimination rate of new disciples was the highest. Most of the time, not everyone in a group could make it out. Half of them would be eliminated here. Even for those who rushed out the fastest, it would still take about 2 hours. And this time, Ning Xuemo was challenging the trial alone. She only had a seemingly weak Kirin by her side. Even if she could make it out, it would take her at least 2 hours. This was the fastest speed that Yellow Jing An had calculated for her. What he didn't expect was that just as he walked near the Bronze Men Alley, he heard thunderous applause coming from inside. Helian Zhao's voice was especially loud. "Congratulations to Miss Ning for successfully passing the first obstacle." Chapter 8:15. She passed the first level. This was too fast. Only a little over an hour had passed. How did she do it? Yellow Jing An stood under the shadow of a large tree, watching the group of new disciples escorting Ning Xuemo as they walked out. Ning Xuemo had already changed into a lotus-pink dress, her small face faintly blushing. Her lips had a smile and her steps were unhurried. That pair of large eyes flashed with an ink-black luster under the sunlight. At this moment, she was confident and calm. Even though there were all kinds of beauties around her, none of them could cover up her radiance. In this place where beauties gathered, she might not be the most beautiful, but where she was, everyone else seemed to have become a moving background. This kind of girl would become the center of attention no matter where she went. Not to mention that she had just easily broken a record. She was the fastest person to pass this level. The youths that came to watch the excitement looked at her with inquisitive, curious, and faint adoration. Intentionally or unintentionally, they approached her and tried to say a few words to her. Ning Xuemo was not cold and arrogant. When it was necessary, she still had a good temper when she wasn't provoked. She talked and laughed with these people as she walked to the next level. Yellow Jing An used an invisibility technique, so these people didn't see him when they passed by, and no one looked in his direction. Only Ning Xuemo, with her naturally sensitive sixth sense, walked under the large tree and suddenly looked in Yellow Jing An's direction. This made Yellow Jing An's heart jump. This girl was able to see through his invisibility technique. Actually, he was thinking too much. Ning Xuema didn't see him, she just felt something and looked over. She quickly turned her head and continued to talk with the people beside her. Even though her body was close to 14 years old, her soul was old. Looking at the group of girls and boys beside her, she felt like they were still young children. Seeing their undisguised worshipful gazes, Ning Xuema coughed in her heart. In fact, the layout of the Bronze Men Alley was similar to the Wooden Dummies Alley of the Shaolin Temple. She liked mechanisms, so she naturally entered the Wooden Dummies Alley to study it. She even figured out several ways to fight it. Although the mechanical techniques in her era were different from the ones in the real world, there were still many similarities between the two. After that, she had solved the Wooden Dummies Alley like it was a toy. Now that she had broken through the Bronze Men Alley again, it would not be a problem for her. If one didn't know how to break it, they would naturally be entangled by the bronze men inside. It would be considered a skill if they could break out within 2 hours. However, an expert like Ning Xuema was very relaxed. After she entered, she quickly found the key points of the mechanisms on the bronze figures, making them unable to move. Then, she swaggered out of the room. She passed this stage with the least pressure and almost no MF was used. The second trial was on a vast and misty lake. Scattered lotus leaves floated in the lake. And Ning Xuema needed to step on these lotus leaves to run to the small island in the center of the lake, then pick a fruit from there and bring it back. This was a test of people's Qigong. To these Earth Stage disciples, Qigong was not a difficult thing to do. The difficult part was that these floating lotus leaves were spinning rapidly in the lake. From time to time, they would change their position at lightning speed. When you lifted your foot, you would see the lotus leaves in one position, but when you landed, they would change to another position, making it easy for people to step on empty air. Chapter 8:16. And this round trip wasn't short at all, it was a full 30 miles. This round trip didn't only test one's lightness skill, it also tested one's judgment, eyesight, and endurance. Not a single one of these could be missing. In this place, one was allowed to fall into the water twice. Those who fell into the water more than twice or exceeded the set time limit would be eliminated. The best record in this round was Feng Jusin. Not only did she not fall into the water once, the time she used was also the shortest. She used half an hour, which was also 1 hour. And Helian Xiao fell behind by 1 point to become the second place. After Feng Jusin came here, she thought of the glory she created and couldn't help but smile. I only used half an hour to run here. This is the fastest. No one has ever broken this record. I wonder how long Miss Ning will take to run here. Ning Xuema stood by the lake and observed the changing pattern of the lotus leaves. When she heard her words, she didn't even turn her head and said, "Wait for me to burst your chrysanthemum." Feng Jusin. Although she didn't understand what Ning Xuema meant, she knew it wasn't something good. She was so angry that she secretly clenched her fist. She hoped that Ning Xuema could fall into the water a few times. Ning Xuema looked at the vast lake and rejoiced in her heart. She was lucky to have overcome her hydrophobia. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to pass this round. Feng Jusin smiled coldly at the side. If you can go back and forth once in half an hour and break my record, I'll call you grandma. Ning Xuema finally glanced at her. Suddenly, she lightly smiled. Do you want to compete with me here? Feng Jusin was stunned. I've already passed this round. Ning Xuema smiled leisurely. It's just a competition with me. Could it be that you're so tired that you don't have any strength? I've passed one more round than you. If you want to say that I'm tired, I'm more tired than you. Of course, if you don't have the guts, then forget it. I can do it myself. Feng Jusin's eyes turned. I can compete with you, but there needs to be a prize. What prize? Tell me. Ning Xuema folded her arms, looking like she was listening. Feng Jusin snorted and said, if you lose to me, you will automatically give up on the other 4 trials and give up the idea of worshipping Dizun as your master. Ning Xuema agreed readily, sure. However, if you lose, you will also give up the right to take Dizun as your master. Feng Jusin paused for a moment, and a light flashed in her eyes. All right. That's it. This was her strong point. She had run once, so she knew the movement pattern of these lotus leaves. She would have a great advantage if she ran a second time. She didn't believe that she would lose to Ning Xuema. If he could use this method to eliminate Ning Xuema without shedding a drop of blood, it would not be a bad idea. The stakes were a little high. Everyone looked at each other. They had seen Feng Jusin's performance here, so naturally, they didn't think highly of Ning Xuema. Helian Xiao couldn't help but say, Xuema, this isn't fair. You're already injured, and you've just passed 2 trials in a row. Your body is already tired. And a certain person has already passed 1 trial today, so his body is still full of energy. She has also run once, so she's familiar with the process. This is too unfair to you. You can't agree to this bet. Ning Xuema seemed to be moved by his words. She tapped her forehead with her finger. What you said is indeed reasonable. It's really unfair to me. Feng Jusin's heart sank, fearing that she would go back on her words. Ning Xuema, you won't go back on your words, right? We've already agreed. Chapter 8:17. Ning Xuema glanced at her. It's just a verbal promise. It only counts if Brother Feng is the witness. Feng Lianyi was actually not optimistic about Ning Xuema's chances in this test. He still hoped that Ning Xuema could challenge other tests and not stop here. So he immediately nodded. The bet hasn't been established yet, so it doesn't count. Feng Jusin was anxious. Ning Xuema, what's the point of going back on your words like this? Don't tell me you're afraid of me. Ning Xuema hugged her arms. Afraid of you? What a joke. I just feel that the bet just now was really unfair. Then what do you want to be fair? Feng Jusin blurted out. Ning Xuema rubbed her forehead. Change the bet a little, and I might play with you. Change how? Ning Xuema glanced at her again and said word by word, since we're going to bet, we might as well make it big. What big? The loser will voluntarily withdraw from the Sun-Moon Sect's disciple selection. Immediately leave the Sun-Moon Sect. Ning Xuema stated her condition. She really didn't like this little white lotus and didn't want to see such a person stay in the Sun-Moon Sect. However, her talent was so high. Even if she couldn't become the disciple of an ancestor, she could still become the disciple of an elder of the Sun-Moon Sect. At that time, they would have to see each other frequently. So she might as well take this opportunity to drive her out. Feng Jusin. Her expression changed slightly. This bet was really too big for her. Her goal was to become the disciple of an ancestor. Even if she was the worst, she could still become the disciple of Yelu Jinghen. If she agreed to Ning Xuema's bet and lost, she wouldn't even have the chance to become a disciple of the Sun-Moon Sect. While she was pondering, Ning Xuema had already started preparing to run. If you don't say anything, then it means you don't want to bet. Then I'll pass this test myself. She was scared. She actually couldn't win against her. So she took the chance to withdraw the bet. She couldn't fall for her trick. What's more, he was the best at this. Winning against her was almost certain. If she missed this opportunity, she wouldn't be able to chase this lass away again. Feng Jusin's mind was filled with countless thoughts in a split second. She steeled her heart and clenched her fists in her sleeves as she declared in a clear voice, I'll take the bet. She was willing to risk everything in order to become the ancestor's disciple. Ning Xuema smiled and sighed. I didn't think you'd really gamble. Silly child, you'll regret it. Her gaze fell on Feng Lianyi. Brother Feng, can you bear witness for us? The stakes were unprecedentedly high, and Feng Lianyi couldn't make up his mind. Feng Jusin was a top-notch talent. The protectors and elders of the Sun-Moon sect had already taken notice of her. It was unknown how many people wanted to snatch her to join their own sect. It would be too much of a pity if such a talent was lost to the Sun-Moon sect just because of a bet. As for Ning Xuema, although her psychokinesis was a little weak, her other abilities were all top-notch. She was also an extremely rare talent, and the Sun-Moon sect didn't want to lose her. But with this bet, they would definitely lose one of them. He was only a guide disciple, so he couldn't make such a big decision. So he coughed. Both of you are top-notch talents, so why make such a big bet just because of a momentary dispute? Just as he was about to deny their bet, a faint voice suddenly sounded. This elder can bear witness for you. That voice was clear and gentle, but it also carried a hint of sharpness. Although their temperaments and personalities were different, there was no doubt that they were all extremely handsome. These people should be very old. The youngest one was more than 100 years old, and the oldest one should be 700 or 800 years old. However, each one of them looked like they were 24 or 25 years old. They were in their prime, and people couldn't help but marvel at the magic of telekinesis. Among these people, 3 had already cultivated to Earth rank level 10 and were in the process of breaking through to Heaven rank. The weakest one was at Earth rank level 8.5 and was about to break through to Earth rank level 9. After breaking through to Heaven rank, one wouldn't age and die. After breaking through to Earth rank level 6, one could live for more than 2,000 years. Today was an eye-opener for everyone. Chapter 8:19. Don't underestimate the difference between level 6 and level 10. Earth rank level 6 and above was an extremely difficult hurdle. The amount of MF needed to advance from rank 6 to rank 7 was 3 times the amount of MF needed to advance from human rank 1 to Earth rank 5. The higher you go, the harder it is to rise. It was just like climbing a mountain. It was easy to climb up from the bottom, but once you reached a certain height, it would be extremely difficult to climb up again. In this continent, those who could cultivate to Earth rank 10 were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. There were less than 10 people in the entire continent. 7 of these people were the disciples of the Sun-Moon sect sovereigns. The ancestor had a habit of banishing a disciple after accepting one. Unless they were in charge of the Sun-Moon sect, all of them would be kicked out to establish their own sections. Of course, this independent sect was actually occupying a mountain and accepting disciples. It could be considered a branch of the Sun-Moon sect. The 4 men who had just appeared were the branch leaders of the various branches of the Sun-Moon sect. Every single one of them had recruited quite a few disciples, and these disciples had recruited more disciples, and so on and so forth. The Sun-Moon sect grew stronger and stronger, and more people joined. In recent years, they had basically stopped accepting disciples. Most of the new disciples had become their grand disciples, or their grand disciples' grand disciples' grand disciples' grand disciples. Only when they came across a truly high-quality jade would they have the thought of taking in a disciple. Among this batch of new disciples, they had also heard of Feng Jusin and Helian Zhao's reputations. They were all prepared to go take a look at the final competition. These people were branch lords, so their eyes and ears weren't ordinary people. Naturally, they had heard about Ning Xuema's sudden appearance and her promise to the ancestor that she would pass 6 stages in a row. Everyone's curiosity was piqued, and they all ran over at the same time. The conversation between Ning Xuema and Feng Jusin naturally fell into their ears. These people had lived for hundreds of years, and Feng Jesen's little girl tricks were nothing in their eyes. Since they paid attention to Feng Jesen, they naturally investigated her thoroughly. They had a kind of evaluation of her in their hearts, but they just didn't say it out loud. The thing that the Sun-Moon sect did not lack the least was prodigies. Thus, they did not regard Feng Jesen and the others very highly. What they were really interested in was Ning Xuemo, a dark horse who had appeared out of nowhere. For someone who used to be trashed to reach Earth rank level 2 in just a few months, this was already a legend. Not to mention the fact that she had a cute Kirin by her side. She even dared to openly challenge the venerable sovereign and inexplicably came out of the dark forest alone. Most importantly, she dared to promise that she would pass the 6 stages within 12 hours. One had to know that they hadn't been able to do it back then. This made them even more curious. On the surface, they looked calm and collected, but in reality, they had already glanced at Ning Xuemo countless times. They were just short of getting a radar and giving her a full-body scan. After Ning Xuemo broke through the first trial, they felt that she wasn't simple at all. When Ning Xuemo quickly saw through her disguise, their curiosity towards her simply rose to the peak. Originally, they wanted to stay invisible and take a look before returning home. But now, they were no longer in a hurry. They wanted to follow them throughout the entire process. He wanted to witness it with his own eyes. With these god-level characters here, Feng Lianyi naturally didn't need to make the decision. Yelu Jing and looked at his senior brothers and discussed with them, these 2 young ladies have made a bet, and this little brother wants to be a witness. Senior brothers, do you want to be a witness as well? The 4 looked at Ning Xuemo, then looked at Feng Jesen. They actually agreed quite readily, okay. Chapter 820. With several masters as witnesses, Feng Jesen didn't have the guts to back out even if she wanted to. She couldn't help but look at Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo smiled gently at her, little girl, try your best. Feng Jesen was stiff and refused to be outdone, you too. With 5 masters as witnesses and a bet that would decide a person's fate, everyone's blood began to boil. Everyone opened their eyes wide, waiting for the peak battle. Feng Lianyi said, start. 2 figures, one red and one white, fell into the lake at the same time. Everyone knew that since Ning Xuemo dared to make this bet with Feng Jesen, she must have some skills. But they didn't expect her skills to be a super thunderbolt. She could simply defeat all the monsters. Her figure was like lightning, passing by those floating lotus leaves in the lake. Her clothes fluttered in the wind, like a flaming flower shooting out. Although there was no mechanism under the floating lotus leaves in the lake, people would still stagger and stop if they didn't tap on it. Those who couldn't control their balance would directly fall into the water. Feng Jesen, who had passed through it once, still paused from time to time to judge when she ran for the second time. Ning Xuemo didn't judge at all. She didn't stop at all. All her movements were as smooth as floating clouds and flowing water. It didn't seem like she was leaping on the lotus leaves in the water. Instead, it seemed like she was running on an ordinary road. In just a few minutes, Feng Jesen was left far behind. Feng Jesen's face changed. She didn't expect Ning Xuemo to be so abnormal. The changing position of these lotus leaves coincided with the 8 diagrams. Ning Xuemo just stood by the lake for a little while and chatted with others. How could she know all the footholds? This was illogical. Illogical. The more anxious she was, the harder it was for her to calm down. At this time, she couldn't calm down, so she couldn't make a correct judgment in the shortest time. She was so angry that she almost stepped on the wrong foot and fell into the water. When Feng Jesen's body swayed, she suddenly felt that there was wind under her feet. Then she rushed forward like a whirlwind. His speed was twice as fast as before. Everyone on the shore was watching. Originally, their attention was focused on Ning Xuema's graceful and agile movements. When they noticed Feng Jiasin, she had almost caught up with Ning Xuema. Because the distance was too far, the crowd couldn't see her real footwork clearly. They could only see that her body seemed to be blown forward by the wind, and her feet almost didn't touch the ground. I didn't expect Feng Jiasin to have such superb martial arts. This scene was also beyond everyone's expectations. Everyone was both surprised and curious. Especially those who had seen her pass the test the first time, they were even more surprised. The first time she did it, there was a slight pause. What was going on this time? Did he perform better than usual? The lotus leaves in the lake changed according to the order of the 8 trigrams. Ning Xuema was very familiar with the 8 trigrams, so when she crossed this stage, she would not make a mistake even if she closed her eyes. Coupled with her expeditious steps, her speed was even faster. When she was running, she naturally felt Feng Jiasin's sudden increase in speed. She was a little surprised in her heart. Ning Xuema inwardly took a deep breath. She increased her pace once again. Just a moment ago, she was still leisurely, but now, she was going all out. Her speed suddenly doubled. On the surface of the water, only 2 figures could be seen running further and further away. In a moment, there were only 2 small black dots left. Awesome! Awesome! Chapter 8:21. With their speed, it would only take them a quarter of an hour to finish the journey. It would be a new record. Both of them chased on the water's surface and Ning Xuema was always a few feet ahead of Feng Jiasin. The small island was soon in sight. Ning Xuema jumped up first and Feng Jiasin followed behind. She was a little surprised and felt that she had the help of a deity. Of course, she would never say it out loud. After a while, both of them found what they wanted to pick. Each of them carried a watermelon-sized fruit and ran back the way they came. This time, Ning Xuema was still in front and Feng Jiasin followed behind. Both of them went into the water almost at the same time. Once Feng Jiasin entered the water, she felt the wind that was carrying her and her heart calmed down. She used all her strength to chase after her. Soon, she finally caught up with Ning Xuema. Looking at Ning Xuema's footsteps, she suddenly had an evil thought. This girl was the biggest enemy she had ever met in her life. She might as well kill her right here and now to prevent future troubles. Her heart moved slightly and her palms made a gesture in her sleeves. Suddenly, she pointed at Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema was running when she suddenly heard the sound of a sharp blade breaking through the air. She turned her head and her expression changed slightly. A large number of fine needles flew from behind her. They attacked her like lightning. Those fine needles were shining with light blue light. Apparently, they were highly poisonous. Needless to say, these hidden weapons were released by Feng Jiasin. This little white lotus actually wanted to kill her and wanted to kill her. No matter how fast Ning Xuema was, she was still on the water surface. Naturally, she couldn't be compared to the speed of these hidden weapons. Seeing that those fine needles were about to surround Ning Xuema, Feng Jiasin's lips revealed a vicious smile. Those who went against her, those who blocked her way, all of them had to die. These children of high officials and nobles all deserved to die. They should all make way for a commoner like her. This way, the world would be fair. After releasing the concealed weapon, she felt proud of herself. Suddenly, she felt the wind under her feet suddenly shake, causing her to stagger and almost fall into the water. She hurriedly steadied herself on a lotus leaf and faintly felt that the wind that was helping her suddenly disappeared. Feng Jiasin's heart sank. Could it be that the heavens were not helping her? Shouldn't the heavens help a commoner like her? Humph, even if he didn't help her, it didn't matter. As long as she killed that eyesore of a girl, she could still become the ancestor's disciple. She wanted to be at the top and trample everyone beneath her feet. She wanted to be the strongest person in this world. She wanted to have a group of servants and a formation of servants. She wanted to be a real princess. All of her dreams were focused on this trip to the Sun Moon sect. Thus, she was willing to pay any price to achieve her goal. Feng Jussin lightly jumped and landed on another lotus leaf. Then, she looked at Ning Xuemo with a trace of a smile, waiting for her to scream or fall into the water, but when she saw it, she was stunned. Ning Xuemo was still standing there perfectly fine. In her palm, there was a long green whip, and the silver needles on the whip were sparkling. It turned out that at that moment, Ning Xuemo had quickly pulled out the vine whip on her body. Those fine needles shot onto her long whip, but she herself was not injured at all. It's impolite not to reciprocate. I'll return it to you. Ning Xuemo sneered. With a shake of her long whip, the fine needles on the whip shot back like lightning. The speed was twice as fast as the ones Feng Jussin shot at her just now. Feng Jussin was so frightened that her expression changed greatly. Those needles were hers, so she naturally knew the poison on them. Once they touched blood, they would kill. Once they were hit, there would be no chance of rescue. Chapter 8:22. At this time, Feng Jussin couldn't care about anything else. She suddenly bent down and those fine needles brushed past her scalp. She managed to dodge the hidden weapon, but she was on the surface of the water after all. The soft lotus leaves under her feet could not withstand her weight at all. She plunged into the water with a splash. By the time she came out of the water, dripping wet, Ning Xuemo had already run far away. Feng Jussin's face was ashen. Her mind was blank, defeated. She was defeated. She suddenly punched the surface of the water. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past her, causing her to shiver. Then, her body seemed to be pulled into the air and she was directly pulled to the surface of the water. Then, the gust of wind carried her forward at a rapid speed. Ha ha ha, God was helping her. God was really helping her. Feng Jussin's body was swayed by the wind, but she almost laughed out loud. This time, her speed was much faster than before. She chased after Ning Xuemo like lightning. Ning Xuemo, on the other hand, wasn't so relaxed. While she was running, her legs suddenly tightened as if they were tied together and she couldn't take another step. The soft lotus leaves couldn't bear her weight and she inexplicably fell into the water. Her legs were bound by an invisible force. That inexplicable force was like ice threads, so cold that her legs were numb. Obviously, someone had plotted against her. She was after all an intelligent person. Originally, she was puzzled by Feng Jussin's sudden increase in speed. Now that she was plotted against by this inexplicable force, she instantly understood. That imposter Di Zun. He didn't want her to win, so he helped Feng Jussin and plotted against her. At this time, she naturally didn't have time to curse. The force that bound her should be the water threads, and her secondary psychokinesis was fire psychokinesis. She immediately used her fire psychokinesis to attack her legs. After a moment, the inexplicable force that bound her finally disappeared. She immediately jumped up from the water and landed on the lotus leaves. Just at this time, Feng Jussin flew past her. When she saw Ning Xuemo coming out of the water, she conjured a piece of soil and threw it at Ning Xuemo's feet, trying to trip her into the water again. Damn it, did they really think she was a sick cat just because she didn't show her might? A sharp light flashed in Ning Xuemo's eyes. The long whip flew close to the surface of the water and wrapped around Feng Jussin's ankle, pulling her into the water again. At the same time, Ning Xuemo's feet were once again bound by an unknown ice thread, and she was also pulled into the water. Ning Xuemo was furious. This time, it was much faster for her to remove the bindings. Soon, she surfaced on the surface of the water and looked around. She was naturally sensitive to invisible people. Even if she couldn't see where the invisible person was, she could still find them with her sixth sense. She suddenly lashed out with her whip at a lotus leaf. Bastard who schemed against others behind their backs. Despicable. I look down on you. When her whip was about to hit the lotus leaf, it seemed to be stopped by an invisible force, and the whip fell down halfway. Coincidentally, Feng Jiasin had just popped her head out when Ning Xuema's whip landed on her face. It made her scream. She jumped out of the water wet. Ning Xuema, you plotted against me. Ning Xuema also floated on the lotus leaf and sneered, you plotted against me first. She didn't want to be entangled with Feng Jiasin, so she took the lead to run forward. As she ran, she scolded, invisible villain. Bastard who doesn't dare to show up in the open. Chapter 8:24. Ever since he was born, he had never been scolded like this. Yet he couldn't make a sound. Ancestor naturally didn't want to help Ning Xuema, he just wanted to use this matter to force her to leave. But he didn't expect that, even after he personally made a move, he still couldn't win against that scoundrel girl. Instead, she found out and scolded him. When Yellow Jing and the others looked over, although he knew they couldn't see him, he still felt somewhat uncomfortable. He was also somewhat puzzled. It was fine if Yellow Jing and the others could sense him, but how could a weak girl like Ning Xuema see him? Logically speaking, it was impossible. Could it be that he hadn't used this skill for many years and it had deteriorated? But looking at the other disciples present, they clearly didn't sense him. His gaze was fixated on Ning Xuema's body. Too many strange things had happened to her, making him unable to fathom what was going on. There must be a demon when things were abnormal. He had to guard against this little girl even more. This kind of person definitely couldn't stay by the ancestor's side. The ancestor belonged to this continent, his gaze shouldn't stay on one person, not to mention this person was a heavenly calamity. He turned around and directly disappeared again. Ning Xuema had passed 2 martial stages in a row and was also somewhat tired. Under Yellow Jing An's instructions, Feng Lianyi suggested Ning Xuema to pass the 1 stage. Ning Xuema naturally agreed. The 1 stage tested one's memory and comprehension ability. The person in charge of this stage was the Sun Moon Sect's disciple who was known as the Memory Ghost Genius. He was famous for his crafty questions, who knew how many people had been defeated by his crude cultivation methods. Usually when the disciples passed this stage, because of the need for absolute silence, the other disciples would wait outside, so as not to disturb the person being tested. But when Ning Xuema passed this stage, not far behind her stood a circle of people. There was no other way. Ning Xuema had created 2 miracles in a row. Towards this 3rd stage, they really wanted to be spectators. Even those 5 masters didn't leave, actually following along. Of course, in order to not disturb Ning Xuema as much as possible, they were still very quiet under Yellow Jing An's restraint. Ning Xuema felt a little bitter. The layout of this place was not like an examination hall, but more like a court. She sat alone behind a small table. Opposite her was an old judge, and not far behind her was a group of listeners. Although everyone was quietly playing the role of handsome men and beautiful women, all eyes were on her. She was the focal point. Ning Xuema rested her chin on her hand and looked at the old man who set the questions. With a wave of his hand, a scroll slowly unfurled in the air. The scroll was densely packed with words. There were at least 400 to 500 words written on it. When Yellow Jing An saw those words, his heart jumped. He couldn't help but glare at the old man. He wondered if this old man had been greeted by the ancestor's substitute in advance. The piece of calligraphy he showed was the most obscure and difficult to understand in the Sun-Moon sect's secret art. The words and sentences were so difficult that even he felt a headache just looking at them. He didn't expect that he would take out this mental cultivation method to make things difficult for Ning Xuemo. What was even worse was that after this piece of calligraphy was opened, it only stayed there for half a minute before it slowly closed again. Those who were slow in reading didn't even finish reading the whole thing. That old examiner's eyes were bright as he stared at Ning Xuemo. "Little girl, you have to recite the 300 words of this essay to pass." The people behind all secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. "Then why did you create such a cryptic article and let me read it for less than a minute and then make me recite the first 300 words? Are you deliberately making things difficult for me?" The old master didn't expect her to ask this question in front of him. He was at a loss for words. Usually, when he took the entrance exam here, which one of the disciples wasn't respectful and reverent? They didn't dare to offend him in the slightest, and they didn't even dare to say a single word against him. Who would have thought that the little girl in front of him would be so blunt and embarrass him? This was the first time he had experienced such embarrassment, so he was a little angry. He sneered and said, "I have the final say here. If you can recite it, then do it quickly. If you can't, then get out. TSK, you're angry out of embarrassment." Ning Xuemo smiled. Suddenly, her face turned serious. "Since you're an examiner, you should be impartial and upright. Treat all the candidates equally. You shouldn't be playing favoritism and deliberately making things difficult for a certain student." Chapter 8:26. How are you fit to be an examiner like this? How can you select a truly good disciple for the Sun-Moon sect? If you do as you please and decide the future of these examinees based on your personal preferences, you might let a few mediocre people pass and reject the true elites. Ning Xuemo spoke harshly, her words causing the old master's face to turn pale. He had always done things fairly, but this time, the ancestor had personally instructed him, he couldn't go against it. Moreover, he couldn't mention the ancestor. This was the first time he had done something like this, and it was done in front of everyone's eyes. He didn't expect the little girl in front of him to have such a sharp tongue. This interrogation simply caused him to lose face all the way back to his grandmother's house. He couldn't help but look at Yelu Jing'an. Yelu Jing'an's eyes faintly revealed a trace of disapproval, but she didn't say anything. He steeled his heart. "Little girl, you can't even recite a single word, right? That's why you're tangling with me like this. You want to attack me and ask me to be merciful and let you off. Haha, then you're wrong." At this moment, Ning Xuemo had already talked to him for so long, he reckoned that Ning Xuemo had already forgotten most of the things she had just memorized. He might as well be impartial. "Originally, I wanted to test you as a genius, so the questions I gave you were slightly more difficult. I didn't expect you to actually be a mediocre person. Forget it, I'm too lazy to bicker with you. Didn't you ask for fairness? Then you'll be the same as the others. If you can recite the first 200 words of the passage just now, you'll pass. How about it?" Just as he finished speaking, Helian Shao, who had been listening from the back, couldn't help but say, "This can't be considered fair. The passage just now was cryptic and hard to understand. Being able to recite the first 100 words is already very impressive. When he looked at it just now, he could still recite the first 150 words, but a long time had passed, and now he couldn't even recite the first 100 words. The others also nodded one after another. They couldn't recite the first 100 words now either. Only Feng Jia Axian sneered. "When we were taking the exam, we each had a passage. It's not necessarily much easier than this. Don't we still have to recite the first 200 words? I recited 250 words. There was pride in her voice. Feng Jusin, even if you don't speak, no one will think you're a mute. Helian Xiao was furious. Why can't I speak? Why do you care what I say? Feng Jusin also raised her head high. Just now, she had made a big scene, so everyone kept their distance from her, which made her very angry. She was used to being the center of attention wherever she went. Now that the center of attention had shifted, she felt particularly uncomfortable. He couldn't help but jump out from time to time to make his presence known. Ning Xuema suddenly turned her head and glanced at her. 250. Feng Jusin said proudly, of course it's 250. She finally realized that something was wrong. These words were used to scold people in the vast Sky Empire. Feng Jusin was, after all, a citizen of the Fengyi Empire. Although she had occasionally heard these words, she didn't take them to heart. It was only after Zhang Xian repeated his words that he realized what was going on. The people around her couldn't help but burst into laughter. It's 251 words. Not an idiot. Feng Jusin blushed. However, no one paid any attention to her. Ning Xuema curved her lips into a smile and didn't look at her anymore. The corners of Yellow Jing An's lips couldn't help but curve. This little girl's tongue was vicious enough, and her reaction was sharp enough. Her martial arts were so high, she was indeed a rare genius. Chapter 827. AI, this kind of person, Yellow Jing'an also wanted to take her in as his disciple. He really wanted to. The four apprentice brothers clearly had the same thoughts as him. All of their gazes landed on Ning Xuema as they began to think of all kinds of ideas to snatch her away. It must be known that in this world, a good master was hard to find, but a true genius disciple was also hard to find. They had seen many smart children, but this was the first time they met someone like Ning Xuema, so they naturally didn't want to let her go. A good exam turned out like this. The old master was very unhappy. He looked at the hourglass beside him and sneered, the time is almost up. Since you can't recite it, then don't blame this old man for being impolite. Heavenly Cycle Dao. Ning Xuema suddenly opened her mouth to recite. Her speed was fast and hard to say, but it was very clear, ringing in everyone's ears. That 500-word passage, she recited it without missing a single word. In a minute, she finished reciting the entire passage, and the hourglass had just reached the time. She had simply memorized it on the dot. Shock! It was the expression of everyone behind her. Stupefied. It was the old master's expression. He stared blankly for a moment and even reopened the passage to read it again, but he still couldn't find a single mistake in Ning Xuema's recitation. She had recited the entire passage. And not the 300 words he had set. No. No, she must have recited this passage before. It doesn't count, it doesn't count. Feng Jia Axian couldn't help but scream. Everyone actually had this thought, feeling that Ning Xuema must have recited this passage before, otherwise she wouldn't be able to recite it so well. Yellow Jing'an also couldn't help but look at Ning Xuema, then glanced at the people around him and said indifferently, no matter if she recited this passage before or not, since she has recited it, then, he hadn't even finished the words should count as a pass when Ning Xuema gave a lazy smile. If I say this is the first time I've seen this passage, you won't believe me. How about this, you can make a piece of text on the spot, and then let me recite it. How about that? The old master was dumbfounded. When he heard this, he immediately said, this old man has a mental cultivation method that I just wrote. I haven't shown it to anyone yet. Ning Xuema, if you can read it for a moment and recite it, this old man will be sincerely convinced by you. Ning Xuema's eyelashes curved again, and she agreed readily, okay. The old master immediately took out the text he had written and hung it in the air for about a minute like before. Then, he put it away. You can recite it now. Ning Xuema tapped her fingers on the table. If I can still recite it word for word this time, what prize will you give me? The old master was stunned and said, if you can recite it all, I'm willing to take you as my master. Are you serious? That's right. Everyone here can bear witness to this. As long as you can recite it, this old man will kneel down and take you as my master. The old master threw caution to the wind. Ning Xuema smiled sweetly and looked at Yelu Jing'an and the other 4 masters. Everyone is willing to be my witness. Yelu Jing'an and the others felt that it was inappropriate, but the possibility of it becoming a reality was close to zero, so they naturally nodded. Ning Xuema smiled leisurely. Then you'll have to prepare your knees. Less nonsense, recite it quickly. The old master was a bit impatient. Heaven's End has an elephant, but there is a god. Ning Xuema began to recite word by word. Chapter 828. This time, Ning Xuema's recitation speed was not fast. She enunciated each word clearly and each word was like a round jade bead ringing in everyone's ears. After 3 minutes, Ning Xuema's last word fell and the hall fell into a dead silence. A total of 700 words. She recited a total of 700 words. Not a single word was correct. Not a single word was correct. The old master's expression was exaggerated and everyone was well aware of it. The hall was silent for 4 to 5 seconds. Everyone looked at Ning Xuema as if they were looking at a monster. Ning Xuema was not in a hurry. She smiled slightly and looked at the old master, waiting for him to continue. After a moment, the old master took a deep breath and suddenly knelt down in front of Ning Xuema. Master. I admit defeat wholeheartedly and willingly admit defeat. Everyone, Ning Xuema smiled slightly and raised her hand to help him up. Master, you don't have to be like this. Xuema was just joking just now. You don't have to take it to heart. In the future, if Xuema doesn't understand anything, I will ask you for advice. A few polite words removed the old master's awkwardness. The old master had never bowed down to anyone in his life, but at this moment, he was full of admiration for Ning Xuema. Moreover, this girl knew when to stop and didn't push him to the brink of death. She had saved his face and made him feel grateful to her. This kind of girl's future would be limitless. Even if she became his master, he would not feel wronged. He bowed and said, in the future, as long as master has orders, I will obey. Ning Xuema saw that he was determined, so she didn't stop him. Everyone congratulated her one after another. Yelu Jing'an could not help but ask, Xuema, since you could recite it from the beginning, why did you take so long in the beginning? Ning Xuema coughed, I was a little tired from the first 2 rounds, so I wanted to rest here for a while. Everyone. So this was the reason why she was stalling for time. Xuema, you're amazing. How in the world did you remember? Helian Zhao's heart was filled with bewilderment. He felt that Ning Xuema's memory ability was simply heaven-defying. Ning Xuema smiled. I know a special shorthand method. She had an amazing memory, and she had learned shorthand before. Back then, she was ordered to steal a lot of top-secret documents. Sometimes, she didn't have the conditions to take photos. Therefore, she basically relied on her exquisite brain to memorize things. She could quickly recite so many technical terms. The article written by the old teacher here was naturally not difficult for her. Shorthand. How do I do that? Helian Zhao was extremely curious. The others naturally had a curious look on their faces as well. Even Yelu Jing'an looked at her, his eyes full of inquiry. Ning Xuema smiled. This is a little complicated. I'll teach you this method when I have time. Almost everyone cheered. One had to know that cultivating martial arts required rote memorization. If they could really learn a method to quickly memorize things, it was naturally something they wished for. These children were also at the time when their thirst for knowledge was the strongest. They crowded around Ning Xuemo, chattering as they escorted her to the location of the fourth round. Yilu Jing and the other 4 disciples looked at each other. Everyone had made up their minds. If this little girl did not become the ancestor's disciple, even if they had to snatch her, they would personally snatch her to be their disciple. If they could not get this kind of disciple and could only watch as she was lost, then they would be struck by lightning. Chapter 8:29. The fourth checkpoint was also a martial checkpoint. Ning Xuemo didn't find it too strenuous to break through this checkpoint. This was a mechanism array. She was an expert in breaking arrays, so the array couldn't trap her. What delayed her was the endless demonic beasts inside the array. After all, she had broken through several checkpoints in succession. Her physical strength was greatly exhausted, and her body was injured. Therefore, it took her quite a bit of effort to break out of the array. Even so, her result was still impressive. She was faster than the record holder of this checkpoint, Helian Xiao, by a minute. When she came out of the array, she found that there were even more people waiting outside. Many people heard the news and came to watch the fun. Once she appeared, she was greeted with thunderous applause. The fifth checkpoint was a literary checkpoint. It tested a disciple's ability to comprehend the mantras. Because the old master had been abused as an example, the instructor for this checkpoint didn't deliberately make things difficult for her. The questions he gave her were also very standard. Ning Xuemo's ability to comprehend words was naturally very strong. Otherwise, when she heard the ancestor recite the mantra, she wouldn't have been able to immediately apply it and put it into action. She answered the middle-aged master's questions fluently. Naturally, she won another round of applause and naturally obtained a very high score. At this moment, more than 8 hours had passed since her bet with the ancestor's substitute. It was already time for dinner. Because she wanted to treat everyone equally and avoid being criticized by others, Ning Xuemo ate with the new disciples. The ancestor's 5 direct disciples, who usually didn't show up, also entered the kitchen. This really made the odd job workers who were cooking for these disciples very excited. They also heard that Ning Xuemo had broken through 5 checkpoints in succession. Naturally, they were also full of admiration. They especially added a few more pieces of nutritious spiritual meat to Ning Xuemo's meal. Because time was tight, everyone didn't want to miss the fun, so they ate very quickly. Its master was so popular, so Kiran was naturally very proud. It also ate a lot. Ning Xuemo didn't care much about the 6th checkpoint. Helian Xiao said that the 6th checkpoint wasn't difficult. As long as one's mind was firm, they could basically pass it. The number of people eliminated in this round was the least. It took him less than 2 hours to pass this stage. When Ning Xuemo arrived at the entrance of the 6th checkpoint, she was still 3 hours away from the stipulated 12 hours. It couldn't be helped. She passed the first few stages too quickly. Unless she deliberately wanted to rest, she didn't waste a single second. The last disciple who passed the 6th level didn't take more than 3 hours, so Ning Xuemo was very confident in passing this level. Of course, the others were also very confident that she would pass this stage. Yilu Jing had even prepared a celebratory banquet for her. The entrance to the 6th level was a cave. Everyone brought Ning Xuemo to the entrance of the cave and stopped. She was still the only one who could pass this level. Even Kiran was not allowed to enter. Together with the others, it watched as Ning Xuemo walked into the cave, then lay down under a big tree to take a nap. Its injuries hadn't healed yet, so it took this opportunity to recuperate. Others might not be able to tell, but it was telepathic with Ning Xuema after all. It could feel that its master was actually very tired, very tired. After all, not only did its master pass these 5 checkpoints, she also went through the dark forest's bewitching array with it. At that time, she used up more than half of her strength, suffered serious injuries, and lost so much blood. Chapter 830. Although Ning Xuema's injury had been treated with the elixir, the blood she had lost could not be replenished in a short time. Kirin clearly remembered that when it and its master were rushing out of the dark forest, she had cheered it up, "Little apple, we have to sleep after we get out. In order to have a good night's sleep, let's go." She and Kirin did not expect that they would encounter such a situation after they came out. She was forced to take on the challenge of passing 6 levels in a row. Until now, she had not even had a good rest. Its master seemed to be indifferent to everything, but in fact, she was very strong. No matter how tired she was, she could act as if nothing had happened. 15 minutes passed, 30 minutes passed, and then an hour passed, but there was still no movement inside. Time went by minute, and finally, 2 hours passed. There was still no movement in the cave. The dark hole seemed to have swallowed all the people, including their bones. There were many people waiting outside the cave, and almost everyone was looking at each other. According to the girl's ability, she should be able to get out easily. She should not waste so much time. Could she have an accident in the cave? Kirin could not wait any longer. Because Ning Xuema had previously instructed him not to use telepathy to disturb her when she was breaking through the trials, so as to avoid distracting her, he obediently waited outside and didn't dare to use telepathy to ask her. It was getting closer and closer to the end time, but Ning Xuema still did not want to come out. Kirin finally tried to contact her with telepathy, "Master, Master." There was no response. Kirin was a little panicked. It tried to sense Ning Xuema's condition. It could sense her state of mind. Strangely, her state of mind seemed to be a little strange. She seemed to be sad and sad. Kirin tried to call her again and again, but there was no response. Kirin was dumbfounded. What was going on? It was sure that its master was not in danger, but why was she not responding? Why did she not come out? It looked at the hourglass next to it. There was still 15 minutes to the end of the time. If its master did not come out, it was afraid that all its efforts would be in vain. At this time, it was already the second night watch. The people waiting outside began to whisper to each other and discuss. Some were worried, some were surprised, and of course, there were also those who were here to watch the show. He wished that Ning Xuema would never come out again. For example, Feng Jusin, because her companions, who had originally surrounded her, had completely neglected her in the past few hours. At this moment, Feng Jusin felt that it was very much to her liking. She couldn't help but chuckle. "It seems that girl is just a so-so. It was just a coincidence that I passed those stages." No one answered her, and the few companions who used to flatter her also kept their mouths shut. Feng Jusin was a little embarrassed. She looked at the hourglass and then looked at the Kirin. Her heart moved. "Hey, Kirin, your master might have fainted inside and is waiting for someone to save her. Why don't you go in and take a look?" Kirin was indeed flustered. Hearing her words, it was somewhat moved. It was about to move when Yilu Jing and said in a low voice, "Don't act rashly. She must be the one to pass this trial. Once you go in, even if you don't help her, it means that she has lost." Kirin was shocked. Of course, it understood what it meant to lose. It immediately stopped and glared at Feng Jusin. She suppressed the disgust and fear in her heart, stretched out her hands, and strode forward. She wanted to go out. Once she got out, she would succeed. She couldn't sense time in the cave, so she used her own breathing to judge the time that had passed. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, she suddenly heard a strange breathing sound. That sound was a little hurried, a little like the breathing of a baby who had a cold. This sudden breathing sound made Ning Xuema's heart skip a beat. She held her breath. This should also be a test, right? Helian Xiao had said that one could hear all kinds of strange noises in the middle section of this place. As long as one maintained their original intentions and didn't get disturbed, it would be fine. The baby's breathing became louder and louder. She could even hear the baby's weak cries as if they were right next to her ears. Chapter 832. Damn it! Imitating a baby spirit. Ning Xuema's heart quivered. She had even seen the village's old zombie. She could still smile and watch from the beginning to the end. Why would she be afraid of this small voice? Ah, this darkness is so comfortable, a young voice suddenly sounded in her ears. The voice was small and tender, like a baby who had just learned how to babble. The voice was a little shrill, as if it was very happy. The sun-moon sect was really abnormal. Where did they get this baby's voice and play it here to scare people? Ning Xuema cursed in her heart. Staying in the darkness, which she was most afraid of, was already hard enough. She didn't expect that they would make a child's voice to scare her. She simply opened her mouth and shouted, "Shut up. Do you think I'm scared? If you continue to play tricks here, I'll pull you out and throw you out." "Woo-woo, mother, you're so violent." The baby's voice simply cried in a low voice. Ning Xuema instantly felt goosebumps all over her body. Mother. She was still a virgin beauty. She didn't even have a boyfriend, how could she have a child? Little brat. Shut up. I'm not your mother. Don't try to confuse me. Ning Xuema said sternly. Hee, Momo, I'm in your stomach and will be born in the future. Of course you're my mother, scram. I'm not the Virgin Mary. How can a virgin get pregnant? Ning Xuema snorted. She felt a little strange. If the baby's voice was recorded in advance, how could it speak so smoothly? She was afraid that she would be bewitched by the voice, so she simply sealed her acupoints and shut off her hearing. This way, the world would be peaceful and she wouldn't have to listen to the strange baby's voice anymore. Hee, silly child, do you think you can't hear me by shutting off your hearing? The baby's voice laughed. How could she still hear it? This voice was transmitted from the depths of her soul. Ning Xuema's body suddenly stiffened. Her dantian suddenly heated up, and she said sternly, "Who are you? Where are you? Come out." After she shouted, no one answered. The baby's voice also disappeared. Motherfucker, trying to mystify things. Ning Xuema cursed in her heart. She opened up her hearing and strode forward. Although she couldn't see, her sixth sense was still very sharp. If there were obstacles in front of her, she would be able to sense them in time and avoid them. Along the way, all kinds of monsters appeared in the cave from time to time. These monsters had strange shapes and sizes, and all of them were filled with murderous intent as they pounced on her. Ning Xuema chanted the incantation in her heart. She could tell that these monsters were all illusory and not real. Her judgment was absolutely correct. When those monsters really pounced on her, they disappeared into thin air. She heaved a sigh of relief. According to Helian Zhao's explanation, this cave was a revolving cave. Whichever cave they entered from, they would eventually be able to exit from that cave. Just like those man-made ghost castles she had seen in modern times. She judged the distance based on her speed and felt that she had already covered 2/3 of the distance. She just had to work a little harder and she would be able to get out. After she got out, she would be able to rest. She was too tired. She was walking quickly when a red light suddenly flashed by the side of the cave. A man in red slowly appeared in front of her. He had picturesque eyebrows, fiery red clothes, and a gentle smile. Little Momo. Shuilan. Ning Xuema was shocked. Chapter 833. She suddenly took a step back and unsheathed her sword. Shuilan, what are you doing here? She was on her guard as she pondered. How did this person appear here? Wasn't there a barrier around the Sun-Moon sect's Buddha Lotus Mountain? Shuilan shouldn't be able to barge in, right? Even if he could barge in, the disciples of the Sun-Moon sect shouldn't have been able to detect him. Could this be an illusion as well? Shuilan stared at her with his deep eyes. He stepped forward and slowly extended his hand toward her. Momo, come back with me, come back my ass. Ning Xuema slashed her sword at him. Get lost. Her sword pierced through Shuilan's wrist and fell into the void. Fuck. It was an illusion again. Ning Xuema cursed under her breath. Since she knew that he was an illusion, she naturally didn't take it to heart. She raised her head and looked over. The red-robed Shuilan didn't disappear like the monsters from before. Instead, his figure became more and more real as he stood in front of her. In the pitch-black night, his figure seemed to be coated with a layer of faint fluorescent light. Even his eyebrows were so clear. His hand was still extended forward, but the smile on his lips had disappeared. His eyes dimmed. Momo, I was wrong. Please forgive me. His tone was bitter and seemed to contain a strong sense of regret. Please forgive me, she really saw a ghost. Shuilan actually showed such an affectionate expression to her. She really couldn't take it. Ning Xuema slashed her sword at him again. If you know you were wrong, then get lost. Don't disturb me again. Her sword slashed at Shuilan's head. She watched as he was split into two like mist, but immediately after, the two halves merged back together. His sleeves drooped down. Momo, are you not willing to forgive me? The one I've always loved is you. Blood slowly flowed out of his eyes, but he still tried to hold her hand. Momo, don't love him. You're my. Ning Xuema was about to go crazy. This illusion was too real. She almost believed that it was true. She looked at Shuilan's outstretched hand and decided to bump into it. Anyway, it was just an illusion. She couldn't let him block her path. She still had to pass the trial. Her entire body felt like it was on fire, and she watched helplessly as she passed through Shuilan's body. An illusion was just an illusion. It couldn't really block her way. After Ning Xuema rushed over, she let out a sigh of relief and looked back. That guy, Shuilan, actually condensed behind her. However, this time, his whole body was covered in blood. Drops of blood continuously rolled down from his red clothes, making him look somewhat miserable. His back was still facing her, and he walked step by step into the darkness without looking back. His arms were still stretched out in front of him, as if he was hugging her. Momo. Momo. His voice was like a cuckoo weeping blood, sorrowful. Chapter 834. This time, it was the white-clothed ancestor. He stood there quietly without speaking or moving. Was this an illusion or a real person? Ning Xuema was a little uncertain. She took 2 steps forward and asked, Great God, how are your injuries? The man still stood there like an ice sculpture. His whole body seemed to be suffused with a cold chill. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly felt cold. This was not the great God. The great God would not be so cold to her now. He was the substitute. Ning Xuema suddenly took 2 steps back. You are the substitute, right? What are you doing here? I know you don't want me to be the ancestor's disciple, but since you and I have made a bet, even if you are the ancestor's substitute, you should still keep your word. You shouldn't plot against a newcomer like me behind my back. She said a lot of reprimanding words, but the man still stood there. His pair of black eyes faintly fell on her body. They were as cold as ice, as if Xuema was just a stranger to him. She didn't know why, but when she saw his eyes, Ning Xuema's heart actually twisted. If she felt some pain in her heart when she saw Shuilan in such a sorry state, now that she saw the ancestor, her pain was actually 10 times worse. Pain, bitterness, helplessness, sadness, all kinds of negative emotions came overwhelming, drowning her whole body. Her nose was sour, and her mind was suddenly in a mess. She couldn't help but take 2 steps closer to him and reach out to him. You don't want to talk to me anymore? A burst of icy coldness suddenly enveloped her. Ning Xuema's vision turned black, and her body softly slid to the ground. The white-clothed man stood beside her for a moment, raised his hand to look at his palm, and slightly lowered his eyes. His move wouldn't take her life, but it was enough to make her sleep for 2 hours. After 2 hours, even if she rushed out immediately, she would still lose. But with this girl's intelligence, she shouldn't be confused by illusions. Just now, she seemed to have been in an illusion. What kind of illusion did she see? The white-clothed man was a little curious. He stretched out his finger to touch Ning Xuema's forehead, but stopped halfway and slowly lowered his sleeve. Forget it. No matter what she saw, it had nothing to do with him or the ancestor. As long as she lost this time, she wouldn't be able to take Dizun as her master, and he would have achieved his goal. There was no need for him to meddle in other people's business. He glanced at Ning Xuema, who was lying on the ground. In a flash, he disappeared. Ning Xuema was left lying motionless on the cold ground. Ning Xuema suddenly found herself on a battlefield. There were a few tens of thousands of people fighting on the battlefield. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, smoke surged, and the flashes of various magic treasures frequently sliced apart human bodies and reaped lives. For some reason, she recognized that the people dressed in black were from the devil race, and the people fighting against them should be from the immortal cultivation sect. The sounds of killing, the sounds of weapons clashing, and screams filled everyone's ears. The scene of corpses strewn all over the place made people want to vomit. Then, Ning Xuema saw that at the rear of the devil sect, there was a black palanquin surrounded by the devil race. In the palanquin, there was a red-clothed man with picturesque features. On his lap was a zither, and beside him sat a red-clothed girl with black hair covering her forehead. Ning Xuema's heart couldn't help but move. This man and woman were actually Shuilan and Shuimo. Shuimo's small face didn't have much expression. She raised her head to look at the battlefield outside the palanquin, her charming face filled with indescribable weariness. Chapter 835. She also had a zither on her lap. It was the Black Wave zither. Shuilan was also looking outside, his eyes brimming with interest. A moment later, he tilted his head and chuckled at Shuimo. This time, these monkeys are a bit more powerful. Maybe we don't need to take action. Shuimo slightly nodded, but didn't say anything. Momo. Shuilan suddenly held her hand. Don't worry, I'm by your side. You don't need to worry about anything. Shuimo tilted her head and looked at him, pursing her lips. I'm not worried. There was no worry in her eyes, only boredom. She raised her hand and touched her hair. She had combed it into a slanted bun, giving her a kind of amorous feeling. But at this moment, the bun was a bit messy. She took out a mirror from somewhere and looked at herself, sighing. This bun is not good. It's messy again. Shuilan put the zither on his lap aside and sat cross-legged behind her. He took out an ivory comb. Don't worry, I'll comb it again for you. What kind of hairstyle do you want? He obviously often did this for her. He skillfully took apart her bun and combed it with his ivory comb. Her long hair hung down like a curtain of a waterfall. Shuilan gently held it in his hand, his eyes gentle. Momo, you're doing very well. Shui Mo's eyes were looking outside, falling on a young girl on the battlefield. Her bun is very nice, I'll comb it like that. She pointed at the girl with her slender jade finger. Shuilan looked outside, okay. Without saying anything else, he combed her hair. His fingers were very nimble, almost in a moment, he had combed Shui Mo's hair. Looking her up and down, he was finally satisfied. Momo, your hairstyle is really very beautiful. Shui Mo looked at herself in the mirror, smiling, it's really good. Shuilan stared at her bright smile and suddenly sighed, Momo, only you can match this hairstyle. The others don't match. As soon as he finished speaking, the gossamer thread in his hand swiftly extended outwards. The gossamer thread first burrowed into the ground, and a moment later, it suddenly flew out from the side of the girl on the battlefield and strangled her neck like a viper. Shui Mo was completely oblivious to all of this. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, then raised her head to look outside. Her eyes searched for that girl's shadow, and she saw the scene of that girl being strangled to death. Her expression changed slightly as she looked at Shuilan beside her. Why did you kill her? Shuilan retracted his hand, and the gossamer hair flew back into his palm and disappeared. He smiled at her, his smile as warm as the spring breeze. Momo, you are unique. No other woman can be like you. Ning Xuema felt as if she had the perspective of a god. These two people were clearly staying in the airtight sedan, but she could actually see their every move. She rubbed her eyebrows, feeling as if she was still watching a show. When Ning Xuema woke up, she couldn't remember everything that had happened in her dream, but she could still analyze it in her dream. She could even link the previous dreams together. She could already see that Shuilan had clearly fallen in love with Shui Mo, and that he was protecting her to the point of perversion. Shui Mo, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any feelings for Shuilan. She only saw him as a companion, a shadow guard, and a trustworthy subordinate. Chapter 836. She didn't seem to approve of Shuilan casually killing that little girl, but she didn't say anything. That little girl was originally an enemy, so killing her was a matter of course. Shui Mo seemed a little sleepy, so she simply laid down on Shuilan's body, nestling on his shoulder. Lan Shan, I'm a little tired, so I'll rest first. Call me when you need me. Shuilan carefully sat up, making it easier for her to lean on. Okay, don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Shui Mo's small face revealed a shallow smile. She slightly closed her eyes and murmured, the best thing I've done in my life was to pick you up that year. Shuilan stretched out his arm and carefully pulled her closer to his body. He raised his hand and stroked her smooth hair. Momo, the luckiest thing in my life was to meet you, and to be able to accompany you like this. Shui Mo fell asleep very quickly, and soon her breathing became even. Shuilan stared at her sleeping face for a moment, then gently smiled and whispered, Momo, I'll definitely take you as my wife. Shui Mo didn't sleep very well. She suddenly wrinkled her beautiful eyebrows, and her hands convulsively clenched the blanket under her body. I hate this, Momo. Momo. Shuilan stretched out his arm and quietly hugged her. Don't be afraid, I'm here. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. He looked down at her beautiful face, his eyelashes slightly trembling, and his fingers quietly clenched. He was nervous. Ning Xuema instantly saw through his mood. He wanted to. Shuailan paused for a moment, then finally leaned down and kissed her lips. A snow-white finger suddenly appeared between their lips, touching Shuailan's lips. Shuailan stiffened. Shui Yimo, who was in his embrace, opened her eyes. Her pair of big black eyes were misty. Shuailan, you've crossed the line. Shuailan simply held her hand and licked her fingertips. Momo, I've already said that I want to take you as my wife. Lord Devil Ancestor also agreed. No. Shui Yimo's pretty face sank. She sat up straight and brushed her hair. I've already said that I won't let you be my husband. Why? Shuailan's hand. Momo, I've loved you for so many years. Do you think I'm not worthy of you? Do you think I've been abandoned? Shuailan. Shui Yimo spoke. You know that's not what I mean. With your current cultivation, you can return to Elan. A few days ago, wasn't the Elan king crawling at your feet? Then you didn't refuse me because we're not compatible. Of course not. Then what is the reason? Because. Shui Yimo suddenly stopped, her face showing a fidgety expression. You don't need to ask. In any case, I won't marry you. I don't want to marry anyone. She looked at him seriously. Isn't it good for us to be like this? Why do we have to talk about marriage? Shuailan slowly sat up straight, lowered his eyes, and fiddled with the zither on his knees, no longer speaking. Shui Yimo paused for a moment, then suddenly sighed. Shuailan, I can't delay you any longer. Shuailan's body shook, looking at her. What? Shui Yimo smiled faintly. You're the king of the snow flood dragons, you should go back and inherit your throne. Chapter 837. Staying by my side as my secret guard is indeed an insult to you. This time, after we return to the demon world, you should leave. Shuima seemed relieved after saying this. Shuailan looked at her, his eyes unfathomable. You know my background. Shui Yimo gently plucked the strings. Not only do I know that you are the king of the Snow Mermaid clan, but I also know that you were accidentally struck into an egg during a tribulation and fell into the hands of the Snake clan. Because of the tribulation, you lost your memories of being the king of the Snow Mermaid clan. You only thought that you were a small snake that no one liked, until I picked you up and made you my secret guard for 300 years. These years have indeed wronged you, your majesty. The shock on Shuailan's face gradually disappeared. He looked at her. Momo, you secretly investigated me. Shui Yimo slightly shook her head. A year ago, the great protector of the Snow Mermaid clan came to see you disguised as a member of the demon race. I also happened to be looking for you, so I accidentally heard your secret. Shuailan raised his hand and held her hand. Momo, I have never felt wronged staying by your side. You want to drive me away. Shui Yimo withdrew her hand. The Snow Mermaid clan has been looking for you for so many years. You really should go back. After all, you are the king. Shuailan slightly smiled. Okay, after we return this time, I will go to the Snow Mermaid clan. Momo, are you willing to leave me? Shui Yimo lowered her eyes, still plucking the strings. Her voice was indifferent. There is nothing to be reluctant about. After you leave, other secret guards will appear. Shuailan's face slightly changed. He raised his hand as if he wanted to do something, but in the end, he didn't do it. He looked at her in a daze. Momo, is your heart made of stone? You don't feel reluctant about leaving me? Shui Yimo didn't speak anymore. She sat there like a cold stone statue carved out of flames. At this moment, Ningxuema suddenly understood what she was thinking in her heart. She wanted to be the demon ancestor. To be the demon ancestor, she had to abandon the 7 emotions and 6 desires. She couldn't love anyone, couldn't like anyone. The things she liked, the things she loved, and the things she cared about would all be lost in the end. Since that was the case, she might as well not like or love him. That way, he wouldn't feel heartache when he lost her, and wouldn't feel sad when he was betrayed. Perhaps she had been too close to Shuailan all these years. She had gotten used to his company and his meticulous care. She had started to care about him and couldn't let him go. Shuailan saw that she was like a statue and didn't speak. He suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "I understand." Shui Mo slightly closed her eyes. Her beautiful face was still expressionless like a porcelain doll. She indifferently said, "Shuailan, after we return, you can leave. I'm tired of you." Shuailan's fingers trembled as he sucked in a deep breath. "Are you trying to drive me away? What if I insist on staying in the demon race?" Shui Mo still didn't open her eyes. She indifferently said, "If you want to stay, it's up to you. But I won't let you be my shadow guard anymore. I don't want a shadow guard who has other thoughts about me." Shuailan. His fingers trembled violently. After a long time, he said, What if I take back all my thoughts about you and just stay by your side like this? Momo, you can't leave me. You see, I've already learned how to play the black wave zither. I can kill people for you, so you won't be stained with blood. Momo, I can only be your shadow guard. I won't ask for anything else. Chapter 838. My skills are getting better and better. I can protect you well. Those people who want to assassinate you won't be able to get close to you. Don't drive me away. You saved my life, I want to repay you. Shuailan's words were so low that Ningxuemo was a little moved. It turned out that Shuailan had such a side to him. It turned out that he liked this demon princess so much. Shuailan suddenly became irritable. Shuailan, you're so annoying. You're still the Snow Mermaid King. Before she could finish her sentence, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded from the palanquin. Shuailan's expression changed. She looked outside and saw that the battle outside had already reached its climax. The demons were faintly showing signs of defeat. She frowned. That whistle was the signal for her to play the black wave zither. She took a deep breath and immediately took the black wave zither next to her. She placed it on her lap and stretched out her fingers to play. Shuailan suddenly snatched the black wave zither from her hand and placed the ordinary zither on her lap. "I'll do it," he said. "No need. I'll do it myself." Shuailan reached out to grab the zither back. Since she had already decided to set him free, she must be independent and fulfill her mission. Shuailan simply stood up. Holding the black wave zither, he looked down at her and smiled. "Momo, this may be the last time I'll do something for you. Even if you want to draw a line with me, don't do it now." Clang! The sound of the zither rang out. Countless waves of light gushed out from his fingertips and flew toward the people of the Immortal Cultivation sect. Shuailan sat there holding the ordinary zither. She looked at Shuailan with a faint light in her eyes. Shuailan was probably in a bad mood. The sound of the zither was like a storm, pouring down on the other side. Zither demon. Zither demon. He's making his move. Countless shouts filled people's eardrums. However, this time the zither didn't sound like usual. Once the sound of the zither rang out, it could kill people like cutting grass. It was unknown where the cultivators from the Immortal Cultivation sect had gotten their hands on some kind of magic weapon that could block the sound of the zither. One after another, they propped up their magic weapons to block the sound. White light flashed one after another, and those magic treasures had already covered the zither sound in a pale white cover. The blue zither waves shot onto those covers, and the ear-piercing sound of metal colliding was deafening. Shui Lan's 10 fingers flew as he madly played the zither. However, he was still unable to break through the white barrier. Shui Yimo's expression changed slightly. She suddenly stood up. "I'll do it." Without any explanation, he snatched the black wave zither and stretched out his fingers to play. After all, she had half of the devil ancestor's power, and the murderous sound she played was several levels higher than Shui Lan's. Her zither music sounded very peaceful, and there was even a hint of compassion in it. However, when the zither waves flew out, every single one of them was like a blade of death. When they hit those people's pale white protective shields, they instantly split open cracks. This was the true zither of the demon ancestor. The originally clear sky was suddenly covered with dark clouds. The surrounding dense green forest seemed to have encountered a harsh winter overnight. Endless leaves rustled down, and the world was filled with desolation. It was as if the wind, the clouds, and the fallen leaves had all become sharp killing weapons, fiercely attacking the cultivators, demon ancestor. Long live the demon ancestor! Long live the demon ancestor! The demon race's camp was filled with cheers. Shui Yimo's eyebrows were calm and expressionless. Her 10 fingers were like falling flowers, quickly plucking the zither strings. Chapter 840. The white-clothed great god sat on the cloud and suddenly floated towards Shui Yimo naturally. The demon soldiers did their best to stop him from approaching. However, this person's skill was too strong. Before he could make another move, anyone who approached him would be blown away by the sound of the zither and turned into ashes in the air. Devil ancestor, why don't you show yourself and fight with me? The white-clothed man opened his mouth. His voice was like Kunlun's cold jade, tinkling in the wind. Shui Yimo's face paled. She didn't open her mouth and continued to urge the zither strings, playing a murderous sound to stop him from approaching. Her faint blue sound waves attacked him, but before they could reach him, they were bounced off by the barrier around his body. He moved faster and faster towards her. It seemed that he wanted to break her palanquin and see the devil ancestor's true face. In this world, no one had ever seen the devil ancestor's true face, not even Shui Yimo. She looked on helplessly as the white-clothed man got closer and closer. He was about to see her. Did he still recognize her? Did he recognize the little fox who liked his flutes so much and was almost eaten by him? Her eyes were astonishingly bright. Although she knew that as long as he got close to her and broke her palanquin, she still secretly looked forward to it. Clang! One of the strings of the black wave zither broke. She was no match for the other's zither music. Her body swayed and a line of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Shui Lan suddenly rushed over. Braving the danger of being injured by her zither music, he rushed to her side and snatched the black wave zither from her lap. Shui Yimo obviously didn't expect that Shui Lan, whom she had always trusted, would make a move on her. She was also completely focused on Shui Lan's plan. Not only did he snatch her zither, but he also sealed her acupuncture points. "Mo, take care." He only said 4 words before he suddenly broke the roof of the palanquin with his palm and rushed out like a flame. Shui Yimo suddenly opened her eyes wide. She wanted to get up, but her acupuncture points were sealed and she couldn't get up for a while. She looked on helplessly as Shui Lan jumped away from her and pretended to be her to meet the white-clothed great god. She heard Shui Lan laugh. "I didn't expect there to be a master of music in the celestial realm. Let me see." He was no match for him. Even though she possessed half of the demon ancestor's power, she had no way of surviving against this white-clothed god, let alone Shui Lan, who had only practiced the zither for a few decades. Shui Yimo was both shocked and angry. She opened her mouth to shout, but no sound came out. He would die. He would die if he went up against that person. Shui Lan. Lan Shan. You can't die. You mustn't die. Shui Mo's body began to tremble as she attacked her acupoints with all her might. Silly child. A voice floated into her ears. Shui Mo stiffened, her eyes frantically spinning. Devil Ancestor. Before she could do anything else, a gust of wind suddenly appeared on the ground. The palanquin she was sitting in suddenly spun in the air and fell into a huge whirlpool that suddenly appeared in the sky. Ning Xuemo finally realized that everything she saw seemed to be from Shui Mo's point of view. Because when the palanquin was sucked into the whirlpool, the world in front of her eyes also spun. After the world spun, when she calmed down, she found that the scene had changed. A dark forest, a dusky sky, a seven-colored poisonous fog floating in the air, and a dark hole. This was the scene of the demon world that Ning Xuemo often saw in her dreams. She saw the red-clothed girl blow into a magnificent hall like a gust of wind. There was no one else in the hall except for a badly mutilated man lying on a brocade couch in the middle of the hall. Beside him was the black wave zither with its 7 broken strings. Mo just wants him to be a good shadow guard, that's all. Mo, if you want a secret guard, you can have a lot. Since he's dead, you can have a better one. But he's the only one who can play the black wave zither. Shui Mo retorted, kowtowing again, Lord Devil Ancestor, I beg you to save him. With him by Elan's side, Elan has a lot less to worry about. He really is a very, very good talent, I beg you, I beg you. Her voice sounded calm, but listening carefully, there was a trace of trembling. Chapter 842. The Devil Ancestor's voice suddenly disappeared. Shui Mo kowtowed a few more times and begged a few more times, but she still didn't get a response from that voice. She didn't know how much time had passed, and she didn't know how many times she had kowtowed, but the Devil Ancestor still didn't reply. Shui Mo slowly stood up and returned to Shui Lan's side, then slowly sat down. After such a long delay, Shui Lan's face became even paler. He lay there like a statue, motionless. She sat next to Shui Lan, looking down at him. After a while, she suddenly turned around and untied her messy hair. Her long hair flowed down, brushing against his cheek. Shui Lan, my hair is messy. I don't know how to comb that unique hairstyle. Get up and comb it for me. Shui Lan naturally didn't move. Shui Mo looked at him for a moment, as if waiting for him to wake up. But the result of waiting was ultimately disappointment. Her eyes gradually reddened. Shui Lan, I want you to comb my hair for me. Do you hear me? She didn't know where she had found an ivory comb, but she put it in his palm, then held his hand to comb her long hair. She originally didn't know how to take care of her hair, so holding someone else's hand like this made it even more inconvenient. She combed for a long time, but her hair was still messy. She finally let go of Shui Lan's hand, no longer caring about her hair. She bowed her head and looked at him for a long time. Her big eyes were as black as a black hole, without the slightest trace of light. It was unknown what she was thinking. Shui Lan, you said you wouldn't ignore me. Her voice choked again. She had already helped Shui Lan clean up the blood on his body. Apart from a few holes in his clothes, he didn't seem to be in a sorry state. The room was deathly silent. She held his hand tightly, motionless and silent. Another moment passed. Shui Lan. She spoke softly, as if she was afraid of waking him up from his beautiful dream. I tried my best, but I couldn't save you. I really couldn't save you. Shui Lan, I told you to leave, but you didn't. Now, you can't leave even if you want to. Shui Mo's voice trembled slightly. After a moment, she slowly opened her mouth again. You can go. Leaving like this is also good. Let me give you a ride. She touched the black wave zither beside her and cut her wrist. Blood dripped onto the zither like a fountain. The broken strings suddenly reconnected automatically in the blood, and slowly restored to their original appearance. She placed the zither on her lap and glanced at him. Shuilan. Don't reincarnate into the wrong body in your next life. Don't come back to me again, ding. The sound of a zither resounded, and a faint blue zither wave flew towards Shuilan. Bang. A dark light flashed in midair, blocking the faint blue zither wave. Lord Devil Ancestor. Shui Emo suddenly turned her head, looking into the void. He's not completely hopeless. That faintly discernible voice resounded again. At the same time, a dark fog gushed out from the depths of the hall, completely enveloping Shuilan, who was lying on the bed. Lord Devil Ancestor, you're willing to help. Shui Emo's eyes flashed as she looked into the depths of the hole. Ah, Mo, you're my daughter after all. How could I completely abandon you? The voice sighed softly, like a loving mother. Shui Emo's eyes shone even brighter. However, his injuries are too heavy. The zither music damaged his soul root. If you want to save him, you need something. Only if you can get that thing, I can restore him to his original state. It was scary enough for a cat to laugh like a lunatic. But who cares at this time? Yellow Jing and his fellow apprentices looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. This girl could finally stay openly. He seemed to have thought of something. He raised his hand and took out a sound transmission talisman. He picked it up and said in a straightforward manner, she passed. She didn't pass by a hair. I saw. A cold voice came from the other side. Did you see it? Yellow Jing and seemed to have sensed something and looked towards a small mountain peak in the distance. Faintly, a young man as cold as ice and snow stood there. Under the moonlight, there was a hint of loneliness. She really is a good seedling. Don't make things difficult for her. Yellow Jing and spoke again, his tone serious. This kind of talent can't be met in a few hundred years. In fact, there were layers of restrictions set up outside the abode. These layers of restrictions were set up by Yellow Jing and his senior and junior brothers. It contained their combined strength, so its might was naturally not to be underestimated. Under their heavy restrictions, even if a fly wanted to fly into her room, Yellow Jing and would immediately know and would be able to rush over in time. Ning Xuema was indeed exhausted. After she came to the abode, she took a bath and went to bed. She slept like a log and didn't know that outside the abode, Yellow Jing and the rest didn't sleep at all. They were lying in ambush at various corners and only took turns to take a nap. Feng Jesin was really sullen today. After she finished washing up, she laid on the bed and couldn't sleep for a long time. She was born in a poor family. When she was 10 years old, she was brought into the palace and enjoyed an excellent life. Chapter 845. Although Feng Jesin enjoyed riches and honor, she lived among high-ranking officials, so a sense of inferiority was born in her bones. However, she was also a genius, which made her proud. The combination of inferiority and pride caused her to be cynical and have a dual personality. She always felt that everyone in this world was inferior to her, and that she was just reincarnated into the wrong body. Although the Empress doted on her, Feng Jesin always felt that the Empress's kindness was not sincere. She was crazily jealous of the Empress's daughter, the real princess. Later, she used underhanded means to force the real princess out. After the real princess committed suicide by jumping into a river, the empress aged more than 10 years overnight, and she was not as good to her as before. On the surface, she was still respectful to the empress, but in her heart, she began to feel indignant. She felt that the empress had wronged a genius like her. Feng Jiaxin felt that with her aptitude, she was more than qualified to be the empress. She had already made up her mind. After coming to the Sun Moon sect and becoming a disciple, she would return to Fengyi country and try to control the empress, making her pass the throne to herself. She also wanted to be the empress and completely change her situation. This was also the reason why she desperately wanted to become the ancestor's disciple. The ancestor was a person of virtue and prestige, and was the god of this continent. If his disciple wanted to usurp the throne and become the empress, the people of Fengyi country would not disagree. In the 3 years in the imperial palace, she learned to behave gracefully and calmly. She was gentle and courteous to everyone. When she first stepped into the Sun Moon sect, Feng Jiaxin won the favor of most people, and also made countless people notice her. Unknowingly, she became the focus of everyone's attention, which made her proud and satisfied. In order to eliminate a strong opponent, she schemed against Helian Zhao. However, Helian Zhao's personality was straightforward, and he disdained to lower himself to the same level as a girl, so her scheme was not obvious. If Ning Xuema did not appear, she would have succeeded. But damn it, Ning Xuema just had to appear. She stole all the limelight from Feng Jiaxin in a few hours, and also made her make a fool of herself, causing her to fall from the heaven that everyone sought after to the hell that almost no one cared about. This made her hate Ning Xuema so much that her teeth itched, but there was nothing she could do. This time, there was an 80 to 90% chance that her plan to take Dizun as her master would fail. While she was tossing and turning in bed, a voice as cold as ice rang in her ears. "Do you want to become stronger?" She was stunned and immediately pricked up her ears. That voice had come in through secret voice sending, and it rang coldly in her ears. "If you want to become stronger and become the champion, then come out. Walk to your left and enter the bamboo forest 1,300 feet away." Feng Jiaxin's heart jumped. Although she didn't know who that person was, this person gave her hope. Steeling herself, she jumped off the bed and ran out. The bamboo forest was dark, and the moonlight was cold. A tall and straight figure stood there with his back facing her. He was dressed in a black robe that seemed to blend into the night. Feng Jiaxin cautiously approached him step by step and stopped about 10 meters away from him. "Senior, did you call me?" That person said indifferently. "Do you want to beat her?" Feng Jiaxin paused for a moment. She was still more cautious, so she answered slyly, "I will try my best to fight for it." "You can't beat her." That person rudely interrupted her. Feng Jiaxin choked. Junior's psychokinesis is Earth rank level 5, but she's only level 2. When it comes to a real competition, it's not just about psychokinesis. Chapter 846. But I'm definitely stronger than her. Today was just a coincidence. Maybe someone deliberately let her pass those tests. Feng Jiaxin said unconvinced. Let her pass. Someone deliberately made things difficult for her, it's true. If that's the case, then forget it. The man's voice was cold, his feet moved, as if he was about to leave. Feng Jiaxin was startled. She was just being stubborn, but now seeing her only savior was about to leave, she became anxious and hurriedly said, "Senior, if you can help me, I will be very grateful." That person paused for a moment, flicked his finger, and threw a green pill to her. This pill can double your strength in a short period of time, but it will cause some damage to your body. You'll need a month to fully recover. Feng Jiaxin was overjoyed. Her psyche power was originally higher than Ning Xuema. If it was doubled, she would definitely win. But was this man trustworthy? She hadn't even seen his face yet. Her eyes were fixed on him. "Senior, thank you for giving me this pill. May I know Senior's name? Once I achieve good results, I will definitely thank you." "No need," the man said coldly, still not turning his head. Feng Jusin held the pill in a daze for a moment. She didn't know the man's background. How could she dare to take such a pill? What if he was trying to trick her? The man seemed to know what she was thinking. "I'm not helping you. I just don't want her to win. If you don't believe me, you cannot take it." His figure rose and disappeared in a flash. Feng Jusin. This man's power is so high. Just based on his ability to disappear in the blink of an eye, it's not something an ordinary person can do. So Ning Xuema also has an enemy here. He just doesn't want her to win. The her he was talking about was obviously Ning Xuema. This point happened to coincide with Feng Jusin. She clenched the pill in her hand, like holding a hot potato. She was lost in thought for a moment, then slowly put the pill away. It was a quiet night. Ning Xuema got up early in the morning and began to wash up. Kirin couldn't help but ask the question that he had been holding back all night. "Master, what happened to you in that dark cave? I couldn't get in touch with you for a while. I was so worried." Ning Xuema's fingers, which were combing her hair, paused. She thought for a moment. Until now, she still couldn't be sure whether the Dizun substitute she had encountered was real or an illusion. Her impression of that period was extremely vague. "I was probably too tired and fell asleep halfway." Ning Xuema didn't want to tell Kirin anything that she wasn't sure about. She didn't want it to worry. Kirin nodded seriously. "That's true. Master, you're too tired. But Master, you've broken the record. If your friends know about this, they'll be happy for you." Ning Xuema smiled. Yes. She was a little lost in thought. No matter who achieved good results, they would want to share it with their family and friends. She was the same. She didn't know why, but she thought of Yi Feng and sighed. If only Yi Feng hadn't left. She then shook her head. But he has to leave. Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan are going to get married. Although he doesn't want to give up, he still has to go and take a look. I hope he won't be too shocked. Kirin was stunned and puzzled. Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan are going to get married. It can't be, right? Isn't she going to risk her life to save Yi Feng? I think that girl is very anxious. How can she still be in the mood to get married? Chapter 847. Ning Xuema paused. What did you say? Yan Ziyuan went to save Yi Feng. When? Could it be something that happened after she and Yi Feng were rescued? That's not right. When Yi Feng was imprisoned, he overheard the conversation between Yi Qingluan's maids and found out about Yan Ziyuan's wedding date. That meant that Yan Ziyuan's wedding date was before, and she and Yi Feng were saved later. Something was strange. There must be something strange that she didn't know about. Why did Yan Ziyuan not go to Yi Feng and get engaged instead? Ning Xuema didn't have many friends in this world, but she cared more about Yan Ziyuan and Yi Feng. If Yan Ziyuan was willing to marry Gu Ziyan, it would be fine, but if she was forced, it would be her lifelong regret. Although Yi Feng had rushed over, he might not have the courage to question Yan Ziyuan, given his personality of wanting to swallow everything down even if it meant losing his teeth. Most likely, he was hiding in the dark and watching his sweetheart marry someone else. Ning Xuema took a deep breath. It was fine if she didn't know about this, but now that she knew, she had to go to Daliang City to investigate. She secretly counted the days. There were still 3 days until Yan Ziyuan's wedding. If she left immediately after settling the matter of apprenticeship, she should be able to arrive a day earlier. While she was thinking, Helian Zhao's voice came from outside. Ning Xuemo, are you awake? It's time to gather. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but laugh. Although Helian Shao was the son of a prince, he wasn't tainted by the intrigue in the prince's residence. He had a fiery and bright personality, so he was a friend worth making. She responded, tidied up and walked out. Today, she was wearing a bright purple dress and a snow-white cloak. Her long hair was casually draped over her shoulders like a waterfall. She had rested for the night, and her complexion looked much better. It was obvious that she was charming and beautiful. Helian Shao was slightly stunned when he saw her like this. Ning Xuemo was in a hurry to pass the test yesterday, so she didn't have time to dress up after coming out. In addition, she lost too much blood, so her face was pale and bloodless, so she was in a sorry state yesterday. She wasn't the prettiest among the group of girls. Today, she had almost recovered and dressed up carefully, so she looked stunning. Helian Shao, who was used to seeing beauties, was stunned for a moment. He was only 13 years old and had yet to grow. Currently, he was a bit shorter than Ning Xuemo. In Ning Xuemo's eyes, he was still a child, therefore, she patted him on his shoulder. Let's go. She took the lead and walked out first. After walking for a dozen steps, they saw Feng Jesin walking out with another girl. The moment both sides met, the young girl greeted Helian Shao and Ning Xuemo. Feng Jesin, on the other hand, looked at Ning Xuemo and Helian Shao with a smile that was not a smile. Suddenly, she smiled at Ning Xuemo. Miss Ning, actually, I have something that you might not like to hear. Your husband, Mr. Han, is a peerless master. You came here to be his disciple, so you're rather neglecting what's near at hand and seeking what's far away. She looked at Helian Shao again. Prince Helian, don't blame me for not reminding you. Mr. Han is obsessed with cleanliness. His concubines are not allowed to be touched by anyone. What nonsense are you talking about? Miss Ning and I are innocent. Don't be so filthy. Helian Shao was angry. I'm just reminding you because we're from the same sect. I don't mean anything else. Feng Jesin smiled and turned to leave. The girl next to her looked at Ning Xuemo and then looked at Helian Shao. Prince Helian, Miss Ning, please don't mind. Chapter 848. The princess is just a little outspoken. She doesn't have any ill intentions. The girl turned around and chased after Feng Jesin. Helian Shao was indignant. Why didn't I notice that she was so sarcastic? Ning Xuemo smiled carelessly. This kind of white lotus will only reveal her true nature when she is provoked. Helian Shao looked at her with a complicated gaze. You don't care. Ning Xuemo said, if you are bitten by a dog, will you bite back? Of course not. Helian Shao answered. That's it. If you are bitten by a dog, either you don't bicker with it and laugh it off, or you give it a good beating. Don't you think so? Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed with coldness. That's right. Helian Shao nodded. His eyes looked at Ning Xuemo with admiration. Usually, when faced with this kind of situation, most people would choose to retort. But if they really quarreled here because of a few words of gossip, it would be unavoidably degrading. What's more, what she said about Han Shangyue was indeed true. Ning Xuemo was too lazy to lower herself to her level at this time. She was also too lazy to argue with this kind of person. If there was no accident, that little girl was crying at the back. However, she had hit her hard yesterday. She was already like a wilted cucumber. After sleeping for a night, she suddenly became so aggressive, as if she had some kind of victory in her hands. Could it be that she still had some tricks up her sleeve? Ning Xuemo thought of the person who secretly helped Feng Jesin during the 4th round of the competition. Her fingers secretly clenched. Could it be that that person still wanted to help Feng Jesin secretly? That was really possible. Why did this fake Dizun reject her so much? Did he help Feng Jesin because he admired her? Did he have a relationship with her? Or did he simply find her, Ning Xuemo, an eyesore? Although that person's martial arts was not as good as Dizun's, it was not low either. If he were to side with Feng Jesin, it would be a very troublesome matter. She couldn't help but hold the snow-white sound-transmitting amulet hidden in her sleeve. This was given to her by Shinjuli, and it was full of spiritual power. No matter what time it was, it always had a cool and comfortable aura. Shinjuli had once told her that she would be able to contact him at any time using this sound-transmitting talisman. When he was in seclusion, he could choose not to answer other people's calls, but he would definitely answer her calls. If she were to use it when she was in danger. She had only received his voice transmission once and had never used it to look for him. His injuries were extremely serious. She later understood. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so weak in the castle. He must have gone into seclusion to recuperate. People who were recuperating in seclusion hated being disturbed the most. Therefore, she didn't want to disturb him with the sound-transmitting talisman unless it was an emergency. What's more, she wanted to rely on her own ability to win everyone's recognition and become his disciple openly. She didn't want to rely on Dizun's backdoor. Shinjuli seemed to trust this substitute very much. Otherwise, he wouldn't have entrusted her to that substitute. This substitute's usual performance must be very commendable, without any flaws. Moreover, he was extremely loyal to Dizun, so Dizun didn't guard against him at all. Dizun probably didn't expect that this substitute would treat her like this. She raised her hand and rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She was already very low-key in dealing with people. Why were there always big shots jumping out to make things difficult for her? Who did she provoke? Chapter 849. Ning Xuemo let go of the sound transmission talisman. Forget it. If no one deliberately messed with her today, then she would fight for that position with her own ability. Whether she won or lost, she did not want to rely on others. As for the possibility that someone might use underhanded methods, that person had already used underhanded methods to trick her twice, and she did not lose either time, right? It was better not to disturb his seclusion. She believed that once he recovered, he would definitely come personally to oversee things. Now that he could not come, it seemed that it was still not possible. Hundreds of thoughts flashed through her mind, and she was momentarily lost in her thoughts. She did not even notice that Kirin was tugging at her skirt. Bang! She directly bumped into someone's embrace. Damn, she was too distracted. Ning Xuemo was embarrassed. I'm sorry. Ning Xuemo subconsciously apologized. Just as she was about to take a step back, the person she bumped into held her arm. Xuemo. This voice was extremely familiar. Ning Xuemo raised her head in astonishment and looked into a pair of deep, dark eyes. She was startled, and her brows immediately relaxed. Your Highness. The person she bumped into was actually Ji Yunhuang, whom she had not seen for many days. Today, he was wearing the white robe of the Sun Moon sect's third-generation direct disciple, which made him look even more handsome and elegant. If not for his slightly pale face, there would be no difference between him and Ning Xuemo when she first met him. Seeing an old acquaintance again, Ning Xuemo was delighted. Your Highness, when did you come? Why did you come? Ji Yunhuang smiled. Xuemo, did you forget that I am also a disciple of the Sun Moon sect? Marshal Ant Jing'an sent me a message, asking me to come and help with the recruitment of new disciples. I just arrived this morning and am about to go to the competition. Let's go together. As he spoke, he held her hand and walked away. There were so many disciples in the Sun Moon sect, so it should be easy for them to take care of the new disciples, right? Why did they have to call Ji Yunhuang back? Perhaps there was some reason behind it. Although Ning Xuema had stayed in the Sun Moon sect for a short period of time, she still did not know much about the rules of the Sun Moon sect. He didn't think too much about it. Ji Yunhuang held her hand and walked a few steps. Suddenly, she seemed to have sensed something. She turned around and saw an extremely beautiful and graceful woman standing behind them. She had slender eyebrows and pretty eyes, and she wore a lake blue dress. She stood there with a layer of faint mist around her, making her look like a fairy. She had obviously come with Ji Yunhuang. At this moment, she was standing there with pursed lips as she looked at Ji Yunhuang. To be more precise, her gaze fell on Ji Yunhuang and Ning Xuema's hands, which were holding each other's hands. A trace of sadness flashed through her eyes. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat as she suddenly realized something. She calmly pulled her hand back and asked with a smile, "Your Highness, who is this?" Ji Yunhuang faintly glanced at the young woman and said in a calm voice, "Xuema. She is the daughter of the Tianqing Castle's castle lord, Tian Xueching." Ning Xuema had heard about the matter between Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueching from Yan Ziyuan. It seemed that the Tianqing Castle's castle lord wanted to give Tian Xueching to Han Shangyue, but Han Shangyue gave her to Ji Yunhuang instead. At that time, Ji Yunhuang did not refuse. After that, Lu Hinti and the Tianqing Castle's castle lord finalized the marriage on the spot. In other words, this Miss Tian Xueching was the future crown prince's wife. However, wasn't Ji Yunhuang treating the standard crown prince's wife too coldly? He pulled another woman's hand and ran away, leaving his fiancée hanging there. Ning Xuema was about to say something, but Ji Yunhuang had already said to Tian Xueching, "Miss Xueching, she is this prince's friend, Ning Xuema." Chapter 850. Tian Xueching immediately fluttered over and nodded with a smile. "Marquis Ning, I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. The Crown Prince often talks about you." Her actions were natural and unrestrained. Ning Xuema had a good first impression of her and exchanged a few pleasantries with her. "Xuema, have you forgotten about me?" A faint voice sounded from the side. Ning Xuema turned around and saw that Helian Xiao was still standing at the same spot, looking at her with a smile that was not a smile. "Who is this?" Ji Yunhuang's gaze also landed on Helian Xiao. The young man seemed to be in high spirits. He stood there with his chin slightly raised, looking proud and spirited. "Helian Xiao, from the Feixing Kingdom. I'm Xuema's companion." "Greetings, Senior Ji." Helian Xiao did not wait for Ning Xuema to reply and introduced himself first. His attitude was neither servile nor overbearing, very much like a prince's. Ji Yunhuang nodded slightly at him. Helian Xiao was a genius among geniuses. Naturally, he had heard of his reputation. However, he was cold by nature and did not exchange pleasantries with Helian Xiao. Instead, he shifted his gaze to Ning Xuema. "Xuema, I'm very happy that you're here. From now on, we're from the same sect." Ning Xuema smiled slightly. Ji Yunhuang's gaze was slightly deep. "That day, you didn't get married to him. Both of you went missing, which made me very worried. Where did you go these days? How did you come to the Sun Moon sect? You didn't get married to him yet, right?" The last point was actually what he wanted to know the most. Although Ning Xuema treated Ji Yunhuang as a friend, she did not want to tell him Han Shanyue's true identity. She also did not want to mention her own matters to him. She smiled. "This is a long story, so let's not talk about it first. However, it's true that I didn't get married to him. Alright, let's not talk about him anymore. Let's go to the Starlight platform first." Ji Yunhuang's eyes slightly brightened. He did not say anything else. All right. I'll bring you there. He waved his sleeves, and a wide flying sword appeared on the ground. The pale golden light of the sword changed, and it was especially dazzling under the sunlight. Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. Your Highness, you can fly on a sword. In this world, only those who had cultivated their psychokinesis to Earth rank level 6 and above could learn the Imperial sword flight technique. She didn't expect that in just a few months after she and Ji Yunhuang had parted ways, he had actually broken through Earth rank level 5 and learned the Imperial sword flight technique. She could not help but look at Tian Xueqing. She naturally knew that Tian Xueqing was a great cauldron tool that could greatly improve the cultivation of the person who had intercourse with her. Ning Xuema could also tell that this Miss Tian Xueqing was no longer a virgin. It was obvious that she had already had intimate contact with Ji Yunhuang. Looks like the effects of cauldrons really can't be underestimated. Ning Xuema was truly happy for Ji Yunhuang. Originally, he had suffered such heavy injuries that it would have taken him at least 2 to 3 years to fully recover. However, with Miss Tian Xueqing by his side, it could be considered a blessing in disguise. She looked at Ji Yunhuang and then at Tian Xueqing. She couldn't help but smile. Both of you should have good news soon, right? When are you going to invite me to your wedding? Ji Yunhuang's expression slightly changed. Before he could say anything, Tian Xueqing smiled. Our wedding will be in a month's time. This time, Your Highness came here for 2 reasons. First, it's to inform the new disciples. Second, it's to inform the other disciples. When the time comes, I hope that Miss Ning will grace us with your presence. A month's time. That's so rushed. Ning Xuema calculated for a moment. She had time in a month's time. She immediately nodded. All right. I'll definitely be there.